Welcome to the Shebeen. How's it going? Sunday evening. I'm Barry Chandler from Stories and Sips. We're here to talk a bit of whiskey, drink a bit of whiskey, share some whiskey news, talk about some exciting things that are coming up in the world of Irish whiskey, in the world of our whiskey club. And we're going to dive into wine and whiskey tonight, a great combination. You're all very welcome. Busy night, busy kind of, we're in a strange kind of vortex of time at the moment. The clocks went forward or back, or they did something in America last night. They didn't do anything in Ireland, not for next 2 weeks. We're about 2 weeks behind generally, and no difference for the clocks. So we're in a strange vortex where some people are 4 hours behind me, some are 5 behind me, some are about a month behind me, but that's their own issue now, nothing to do with the clocks. And so if you've joined here at the right time, fair play to you. If you've not joined here at the right time, you're watching this in a replay, you're also very welcome. I'm looking forward to sharing a drop of whiskey with you tonight. This is called the Shebeen, which is an Irish, uniquely Irish cultural element. Technically, it's a hidden pub inside somebody's house where it shouldn't be, with no liquor license, no legal right to be there. It's just happening. And that's what we're doing here tonight. We're all gathering around a drop of whiskey, maybe an old pint or something, to talk about what's going on. It's Oscars night. This could go on to become an Oscars viewing and celebrating party, depending on how many gongs or awards the Irish pick up tonight. We might be here all night. I'm willing to stick it out if Oscars start landing on Colin Farrell's lap or Brendan Gleeson's lap. We might keep going. We might open a few good bottles to celebrate. We'll see how we go. I know it doesn't kick off for another hour, but all indications are that we'll still be here in an hour, maybe two. Somebody said in the comments earlier, is it Tony? There hasn't been singing in a while. There might have to be. And away we go, says Tom. Tell me what you're drinking. I'd love to know what's in your glasses. I'm starting off with, where is it? It's here. I've got a drop of Thomond Gate Ruby Port Cask. I'm going to talk about this tonight. This is just landing in the United States. Just landed this week. And we'll talk about that tonight. I'm drinking a small old drop of that. Let me know what you're drinking. What's in your glass tonight? There's the old banner. If you don't see the banner, you don't get any instruction. Eamon Long is enjoying the Thomond Gate Ruby Port also. Good man, Eamon. Redbreast 12 for Rich. Jason Norris, a pint of plain and a simple Powers Gold. No better combination. Jameson Pot still for Amy. Nice one. And Tom D's got Irish coffee using Powers Rye. Oh, that's interesting. Let us know your thoughts on that. Jeff is starting with a couple of blue spots. Not just one, mind you, but a couple. We have a drop of it here. We'll be talking about it as well as part of our wine and whiskey conversation in a little bit. Good evening to Tyrone and to Tony. You're all very welcome. Chris Connor is still in the car. Can't pour anything yet. Smart move there, Chris. Just listening in anyway. Fair play to you. Kevin says hello from Austin. How are you, Kevin? Starting off some Green Spot Chateau Level Barton. Nice. We'll talk about the Wine Geese series from Green Spot tonight. I've got Quails Gate, the new Green Spot here. We'll taste it. We'll talk about it. We'll explain it. We'll learn about it together. Johnny McNally is sipping Poland Spring. Neat. In Long Beach, New York. Greg Anderson, Bushmills Vermouth. That was one of the Irish releases of the Causeway collection for Bushmills in 2022. The first ever Irish whiskey aged or finished in a vermouth cask. Nothing yet for Brian Redden. He's reviving from his parade day yesterday. Brian, you've had a whole day now. This seems like an excuse. Tully 14 in the glass for Tony. Fair play. So we need to nominate somebody after about an hour who's going to keep an eye on the Oscars. I don't have any stream of it going here, but we need to know when the Irish win. If the Irish win, it's the first time. I think it's the biggest Irish set of nominations. Is there 9 nominations maybe for movies that are attached to Ireland, contain Irish people, or an Irish dog once walked through the set? I don't know. We'll claim what we can, but there's an Irish language film. I think it's nominated for best foreign language film. It's called On Colleen Kuhn, which means The Quiet Girl, and that's up for an Oscar as well. So fingers crossed that the Irish clean up tonight. We've been yeah, sure. Listen, we've been throwing our hat into the ring now with the old acting for a while, and but it would be nice to pick up some awards, especially for something like the Banshees of Inisherin. Great movie altogether. Maybe the donkey will get an award. Ian's got Red Spot to start. Tyrone loves the Green Spot Chateau Montelena. It was ingenious to concurrently come out with a dance. Chateau Macarena. Parades happening all over the United States. It's a week of celebrations over the next week. It's Irish Week, really, isn't it? The month is Irish Month, Irish Heritage Month. March, celebrating St. Patrick. Just like John Jameson came from Scotland, we don't tend to mention that St. Patrick came from Wales, but we take him in as our own. He became one of ours. And when we saw that he could do a good trade for Ireland, we held on to him. And we've been parading him out wherever he can make a bit of money for the country ever since. Patron saint of Ireland, of course, too. All joking aside, I'm old enough to remember when the pubs were closed in Ireland on St. Patrick's Day because it was a holy day. It was a feast day. You couldn't have a pub open on the holy day, so the pubs were closed on St. Patrick's Day. Those days are long behind us, and in America, you'd laugh at the thought of the pubs being closed on St. Patrick's Day, wouldn't you? If you're just joining us, you're very welcome. We try and get together every Sunday night to talk about Irish whiskey or to find a reason, not that we need one, to come together and chat, connect. Lots of people who are in the comments have become friends with each other over the last few years. We'll talk about the great community that's been growing up around Irish whiskey in the United States later on. And many of you meet up in person, you share whiskeys, you send each other whiskeys, you find ways to get samples to each other. And you've been great supporters of our whiskey club. And there's a great community here. If you're new here, ask questions. It's informal. You'll see how informal and unrehearsed it is as it goes on. There's not much formality to it. We've got a few slides that we'll throw up on the screen as crutches to keep us on the straight and narrow as we go through the evening. But really, this is a chance for us to celebrate the thing we love, which is Irish whiskey, and the people who make it, the places where it comes from, and the community that builds up around it. And I've long maintained and will forever maintain that whiskey is more than the liquid in the glass. It is a catalyst for conversation and for crack and for community, and that's why we're here. So we will move on briskly to talk about some new whiskey releases. Keep us posted about what's in your glass. I've got lots to cover tonight, from new whiskey releases to whiskey and wine combinations to our upcoming Knappogue whiskey tasting that we're doing. We're going to talk about upcoming whiskey club releases. We'll talk maybe a little bit about the whiskey bus. We'll talk about some events that are coming up. We'll talk about what we're doing for St. Patrick's week ourselves next Sunday night. Lots to cover. And then we're going to keep an eye on the Oscars. So somebody's going to keep an eye on hashtags or what have you in about an hour's time. If some of us start to get a little bit horizontal from the crack. Kristen working hard anyway. Kristen keeping everyone fed and watered for Patrick's Week. Fair play to you, Kristen. All right. One more thing before we get going. If you wouldn't mind giving this old video a like and a share, click the like button. It's right there underneath your video. You're watching it on YouTube. Click like. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, it's free. Please do it. It helps us get in front of more people. If you want to share this in any Facebook groups or your profiles or on Twitter or on Instagram or wherever you can share it, please take the link that's on the top of the page and share it. We want more people to join in the crack. The community is growing all the time. And it's remarkable how many people, probably 10 times more people, watch our live stream during the week who can't join us live because they have decided to prioritize other parts of their lives outside of Irish whiskey. Can you believe it? But the hardcore bunch are here, and we have the crack here on the Sunday night. But we want people to see this any day of the week. All of our live streams are archived on our YouTube channel. You can go back and watch any of them. This is called the Shebeen. We used to do one called the Lock-In, which was a 4-hour long session, which for medical reasons surely had to come to an end, which it did, because those 4-hour sessions, there was going to be no survivors, and we needed survivors. So we've moved to a more timid affair called the Shebeen, normally an hour to 2. Not as much carousing and singing and shouting and screaming and guests. Instead, it's a little bit more of an organized affair, and it tends to keep the gout at bay, which is really what we want to do at the end of the day. Okay. Oh, yes, castles. Dave wants to talk about castles. We'll have to talk about castles. All right. What could be more important than the Shebeen? Yes, the Shebeen will keep going through Lent. Nobody's going to give up the Shebeen for Lent, least of all me. Okie dokie. Let's start by talking about some new whiskey releases that have come across our desk in the past week or 10 days. We didn't have a Shebeen last week because I was coming back from the Southeast Whiskey Festival. No harm in talking about that for 2 minutes before I get into the whiskey releases. So last week was the first of what seems like a plethora of regional whiskey festivals that are popping up around Ireland. Southeast Whiskey Festival was one of the more recent, certainly is the most recent of those outside of Dublin affairs. Whiskey Live in Dublin was the heart of the whiskey community gathering every year, Whiskey Live in Dublin. But now we've got the Southeast Whiskey Festival. I know there's things going on in Belfast Whiskey Week. We've got the Cork Whiskey Fest coming up at the end of March as well. I expect to see more popping up around the country, which is great news. The big takeaway from the Southeast Whiskey Festival, which was very cleverly run by Michael Cowman, Daithí O'Connell, and Johnny from the Sky and the Ground pub in Wexford, is that what they did very cleverly was that they insisted that all of the distilleries and brands that were attending bring warehouse samples or samples of their own new make spirit or their own whiskeys. In other words, no sourced whiskeys. Don't bring things that Great Northern Distillery made or Cooley Distillery made or Bushmills made. Bring your own. And allowed us to taste samples of what's to come. In other words, whiskeys that haven't been yet released. Maybe they're already of age. Maybe they're still spirits. They're not yet 3. Some were that were 7, 8, 9 that hadn't been released yet. And it gave us a great insight into the future of the Irish whiskey industry in the next 5 to 10 years. The great news is the future is safe, at least from a production standpoint, from a quality standpoint. Amazing quality coming out of the Southeast, coming out of Ireland, that was on display and that we were tasting in Wexford. And I would encourage you all to think about regional festivals like the Southeast Whiskey Fest, like Cork Whiskey Fest coming up at the end of March, when you're planning future trips. Our whiskey bus doesn't really work with some of these whiskey festivals because 40 people rocking off a bus suddenly fills up an entire festival and or at least a session. And that doesn't really work for everybody else. So these could be things that you do when you're not on the whiskey bus or you're planning your own trip, that you might decide, I'm going to come in March, I'm going to come in February or wherever it is, whenever it is, and you tie in a little 2-day, 3-day weekend and have a great immersion into Irish whiskey. So that was a great time last weekend. Congratulations to Daithí O'Connell and to Michael Cowman and to Johnny for a great event, really well run, really well put together, and great crack. And that's what you really want. No trouble, nothing, just nice people. So I encourage you to stick that on the old list. Alrighty, so let's talk about some new releases. As you're telling me what's in your glass as well, keep me posted on that. Let's start with this one. So Two Stacks, who are friends of Stories and Sips and friends of Irish Whiskey Fans of America, because our first ever club release was with Two Stacks. They've released some great whiskies over the past 2 years. They have a collaboration with Irish Malts at the moment. Irish Malts have a single barrel with them that has resulted in a 6-year-old single malt that's been finished in PX sherry casks, 56% ABV. €80 available on irishmalts.com. If you're interested, go check that out on irishmalts.com. 6 years old, and they still have bottles left per my checking before we came live. What's great to see now are the number of collaborations that are taking place with societies, with bars, with retailers who are able to bring out a one-off version of something that might not be commercially viable as a global release, but we get to taste it as consumers because of the retailer or the community or the Facebook group or the whiskey club's community being able to purchase it and being enough of the size of an audience to make it make sense. So Irish Malts is another in a long line of collaborations that have taken place with retailers like Celtic Whiskey Shop, carry out off license in Killarney. There's whiskey clubs all around Ireland are doing their releases as well. We're doing our own releases through our whiskey club. And it's great to see these and it's great to support them. And it allows us to try something different that might not be available more globally to us. So that's the first of the releases that came out just this week. No peat in it, Caroline. No peat in it at all. Tyrone wants to know if there's any whiskey festivals in Ireland in January. Not currently, but that could change. I think people are coming out of the woodwork now and seeing the demand and the interest in Irish whiskey, and they're putting a lot of time and effort into festivals. So we might see something in January. Who knows? Next up, we're going to talk more about this later. Thomond Gate Whiskey have released in the United States. So Thomond Gate Whiskey, we'll talk a lot more about them later in the show. But they've released a single malt ruby port cask finish, and that is at a nice whopping 59.75% ABV. I think there's about 110 bottles of it have landed in the United States, which is a small allocation. It's available via Folsom Wine and Spirits. Folsom Wine and Spirits. You can Google them. They're online. They'll ship to you almost anywhere in the United States. And yeah, that's what's in my glass at the moment. And I will save my notes and my talk about this for a little bit later. But I'm really enjoying it. I had another call earlier, and I was just sipping away on this. I'm onto probably my third pour of it. Anyway, I'll save it. But that's available now. This was there was one cask. I think this might be the second cask of this. Another cask was released via Irish Malts that sold out last year, to the best of my knowledge. Now this is the first time Nick Ryan, the founder of Thomond Gate Whiskey, has brought his whiskeys to the United States. And I know there's a big community of fans of what Nick is doing, and this is a chance to get something in the United States shipped to you. If you're in California, it'll get to you overnight probably, and anywhere probably in the country within 3 or 4 days. So check that out on Folsom Wine and Spirits. I'm going to put that in the comments here. If anyone, a bit like Johnny Cash's song, but it's a spirit store, not a jail. Folsom Wine and Spirits. Okay. Next up is another Thomond Gate whiskey release. So Nick has been very busy this weekend. He released 2 casks of single pot still in a red wine cask finish, Chateau Kerwin red wine cask finish, and they were 2 releases. These releases were done simultaneously. One with Irish malts, which may have sold out. I can't find it on their site. And the others with Fine Wines in Limerick, where you can get it in a retail store only. So helpful for the local audience to buy it. This is a red wine cask finish. Every one of Nick's releases has a story behind it. There's a history. It's tied into something historical related to Limerick, related to the Irish that have gone overseas, have done interesting things. And their stories are documented through the whiskey. It's almost like you could almost call it stories that go with the sips, couldn't you? And this Thomond Gate whiskey has started to get a great following, and Nick is very fastidious and detail-oriented and has great plans for the brand, and I'll talk more about those in a bit. 120 euros for that one. They're all very small releases, 100, 200 bottles at a time, and when they sell out, they sell out. These whiskies are sourced whiskies that Nick sources from the likes of Great Northern Distillery and does very interesting cask maturations with them while he's growing his own barley, while he's eventually going to build his own distillery, and on and on and on. More details on that in a little bit. Tony ordered his a little bit ago. Amy ordered a Thomond Gate as well. Can't wait to try it. Very good. Great. Welcome if you've just joined us. And make sure you keep a drop of Irish whiskey in your glass and let us know what it is. It's Oscars night as well. We're keeping a close eye on the time because in the next 45 minutes, the Oscars kick off and the Irish are going to sweep the board. And if they don't, I'll be crying myself to sleep, crying into this glass of whiskey. Next up, we've got... You've heard of Short Cross whiskey, but have you heard of North Cross whiskey? This is a very interesting one that came across my desk this week, and I have not heard much about it. It is a Irish whiskey blend from Great Northern Distillery, so a blend of malt and grain whiskies, 43% ABV, and look at the price point, $24.99, and it's for the US market, $24.99. That is a massively low. Can we say that? Massively low price point. It's not often we see an Irish whiskey. I don't know how they're able to bring that to market. It must have massive quantities, bulk buying, great distribution deals, but to be able to bring this to you, the retailer, I mean, that's the shipping cost alone that you would pay in a bottle from Ireland, or that you would pay with our whiskey club, where we've already subsidized $27. It's like $50 to ship a bottle from Ireland. We typically pay half that to subsidize your shipping. I don't know how they're getting this. Obviously, containers and containers of it heading to the United States. Lovely looking bottle. Look really nice on the shelf. Great Northern Distillery. I'm going to try and get a bottle of that here in Ireland and test it for you. If you see it, let me know. Tom says at his local store. Tom, for $24.99, you could do worse. You wouldn't get 12 cans of beer for that. So maybe check that out. So that's a new release, North Cross Irish Whiskey. Caroline says whiskey never came across her desk while she was working. What was I doing wrong? Caroline. This seems like a misspent adulthood. If your job doesn't involve whiskey crossing your desk at some point or all points during the day, it would almost seem like a bit of a wasted day altogether. There's always a way. Next up, what have we got? Okay, here's an interesting range of whiskies that have come available in the last week, and it's from Boan Distillery, from the Whistler range of whiskies. Many of you are familiar with the Whistler. And first of all, can we acknowledge the beauty of the designs of these whiskies? Their design game is out of the world. These are 3 new Whistler releases. I'm going to put up the details here so that I can read them out to you. Tell how organized I am. I have nothing to hand. So the first one on the left is called the Whistler Dark Symphony. The already award-winning Dark Symphony brings you on an exciting trip through the Whistler universe. A unique finish in Knappogue cognac barrels, new era oak cask. We're going to talk about that in a second. And this is triple distilled. Our blend is a choice of the finest Irish malt and grain whiskies. €52.50 available on their website, on the Boan or the Whistler website. So these are online only, it seems, for now, these releases. So the Dark Symphony is the first one. In the middle, you've got a 10-year-old French oak finish single malt. This was first matured in American oak, giving it its full-bodied and honey profile, and then it was finished in a French oak barrel infused with the finest Bordeaux wine from its initial use. So, wine finishing. That's our show, is all about wine finishing tonight and wine cask maturation. Here's a great example now. A 10-year-old single malt, aged in bourbon, aged in American oak, or first in American oak. It doesn't say if it was bourbon. I presume it was. And then the French barrel was also taken through the Knappogue process to offer a virgin oak base to further the maturation. All right, we'll talk more about what that means in a second, because Knappogue is interesting. Unique single malt highlights the best traits of 2 different species of oak. So American oak and French oak you've got there. That's €75 on their website. And then on the right-hand side, you've got the Whistler 16-year-old Palo Cortado finish called El Misterioso. We're getting fancy. Palo Cortado is a rare variety of sherry. It's initially aged under flor to become a fino or amontillado, but then inexplicably loses its veil of flor and begins aging oxidatively like an oloroso. Es muy misterioso, says the press release very cleverly. Right, so we've got Palo Cortado single. Is it a single malt? Or is it just a... Doesn't say if it's a single malt. Palo Cortado, the Whistler 16-year-old Palo Cortado finish. Oh, it is. It's a single malt. Okay, I can see on the label it's a single malt. All right. So €165 for this one. 16-year-old single malt. Is it double or triple distilled? It doesn't say. So we can't tell you secretly where it come from. It is remaining El Misterioso. All right, so those are from the Whistler. These are lovely, lovely, lovely looking bottles anyway. I haven't tasted a single one of them. I would like to. And when I do, I'll come back to you. But really loving that lineup. The color looks just beautiful. There's the packaging. Packaging has come so far in whiskey. We talked about it there 2 weeks ago, and the people clutching their pearls and shouting at clouds about new boxes and new packaging. But you have to admit that generally the world of Irish whiskey has moved so far ahead from where it was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago in terms of its packaging. But these are beautiful. All right, what else have we got? Are those all the new releases? I think they are. Those are all the new releases. I expect some more new releases in the coming weeks to be able to share with you after St. Patrick's Day. There'll be a few. And as soon as I get information on those that I can share with you, I've got a few samples of them here. I'll share all the details with you. Some people notice that I tend not to share information about whiskies before they're released, even if things get leaked or images get leaked online. It's just a policy that I have on Stories and Sips and in our whiskey club not to share images of labels that have been approved in the United States prior to them being available. I don't share any kind of conspiracy theories / predictions about what's coming, only because having talked to many small whiskey business owners, I know the challenges associated with communication and how much time is dedicated to following up or to answering questions that come in when they may not be ready to answer questions. So there's a process of getting labels approved for the United States through the federal government, through the Tobacco and Trade Commission Bureau, where sometimes months in advance of a whiskey landing on a shelf, a label will have to be approved, and once it's approved, it becomes public domain kind of knowledge, or it's publicly available for people to see. I don't know if it serves us to know. It's not final. First of all, details can change, and second of all, it creates all kinds of hassle for the brand who has invested money in PR companies, in lining up launch plans, in getting stock to the United States, and if they can't get it there, it's a nightmare. So I tend to just say, we'll wait. When the brand is ready to tell us what they have, we'll talk about it. We'll support them where we can, and that's it. So when more comes, we'll share more. Plenty of other places I'm sure you'll find online where people are leaking information. It's just not something I do. Don't care. I don't have anything bad to say about those who do, but just I want to support the distilleries, and they've told me that just doesn't work for them. It just creates all kinds of hassle, and that's the last thing we want to do. We're here to make life easier and to showcase interesting people from interesting places doing interesting things. All right, let's talk about whiskey and wine. Finish my Pepsi Max though. Do you know there's more hydration in a Pepsi Max than there is in water? All the facts dropping tonight. Welcome to the Shebeen. If you're just joining us, good crowd here tonight. We're talking about whiskey and wine next, and we're going to share some samples, taste some samples of wine finished on wine-aged whiskeys. Let us know what you're drinking. If you just joined us, click the like button, click the subscribe button, and that's it. That is the cost of entry. Tell your friends about us, or shout at us, scream at us in the comments. We've got thick skin, and there's a few in there that'll fight back just as strong. There is more Irish whiskey aged in wine casks than ever before. Aged, finished, matured, you name it. In fact, today, it is almost difficult to find a whiskey that has not spent some of the time of its maturation in a cask, a barrel that previously contained some kind of wine, be it a red wine, a fortified wine, a white wine. Such is the prevalence and almost ubiquity of them right now in the world of Irish whiskey. And we can argue about the merits or the demerits of such a thing, and we'll get into that. And we'll take some positions if we like, and we can argue about it. And it'd be a good thing to discuss. But we have a great range of wines that are now finding their way to Ireland, wine casks finding their way to Ireland, where we age our whiskey in. Everything from sherry casks, port casks, you name it, to other things like Bordeaux, Pinot Noir, Barolo, Burgundy, etc. It's an interesting thing, wine and whiskey, and it's a good week to talk about it. There's been a couple of releases of whiskey in the past week that allow us to dive into it a little bit. And also, I got a couple of questions during the week about the term whiskey finishing and what that means. So we might as well dive into it. We're not all, first of all, I'm not an expert. Some of you are. I'm an enthusiast, and I've learned from research and from asking people questions and from researching online, etc. And sometimes I'll have an answer to a question you might ask. Other times you might have an answer to a question I'll ask. But I think it's helpful for us to dive in and maybe discuss some of these things, because it can get quite complex. And as the world of Irish whiskey expands and grows, and long may it, so too does the list of acronyms and approaches to production and methodologies and all things that can make the world of whiskey seem a little bit unapproachable. And we don't want it to be that way, and we want it to be available to everybody. So it shouldn't be pretentious, and we should be able to talk about these things. So we'll very casually, non-academically, dive into the world of whiskey and wine and talk about it, because it's quite interesting. And look, we have experts here. Eric Waite, he's a certified sommelier. So Eric will give us far more information. So give Eric a buzz in the comments there about things that I'm not able to answer, and we'll defer to Eric as well. And he said his wine background has been very helpful in studying whiskey. Excellent. And Eric's got a great YouTube channel too, by the way, which you should check out. Caroline says that her husband Jim says that whiskey finishing means emptying your glass. I like it. All right. So when we talk about wine and whiskey, we're really talking about two different things, because the wine world is quite broad and quite vast, and there's a lot that we have to understand and cover. But we could break it down fairly easily into regular wine casks, in other words, those that contained wine that you and I might buy to have at our dinner, wines that have a lower ABV, maybe it's 6%, 7% ABV, 14%, 15% proof, table wines, regular wines that we'll buy on the shelf, that we'll drink with friends. And then there's the fortified wine side of things, the fortified wine casks, which we would consume less frequently, but have perhaps an oversized impact on the world of whiskey. And by fortified wine casks, I mean wine that has been fortified through the addition of a high alcohol spirit. We'll talk about that process in a second, that are high in alcohol, high in sweetness, typically the likes of sherry, port, Madeira, Malaga, Marsala, as examples of fortified wines. Those two are very different. And when we talk about wine in Irish whiskey, we must understand which one of these we're referring to, because they'll have different roles, different ways to use them, different lengths of time for maturation, different size casks, for example. But a couple of things we should know about wine and whiskey is that a lot of it is experimentation. There's no hard and fast rules. A lot of it is trial and error. A lot of it is distillers and blenders matching based on expectations, based on hope, based on flavor profiles. They think will complement one another, but there's a lot of trial and error that takes place. Some things are more proven than others, and some things have been done for many, many years longer than others. Fortified wine casks have a very long, rich, forgive the pun, history in Irish whiskey, but then so do wine casks. Wine casks, regular wine casks, have not found their way into the world of Irish whiskey as much in the past 10 years as they have in the past 10 months. There's been some that have been out there for quite a few years that we'll talk about in a little bit, but we're seeing more and more the use of them in whiskies. There are purists out there who will argue with the use of wine casks in the role of finishing, which we will explain in a second as well, as being something that it shouldn't be needed. If the whiskey is good enough or the first barrel is good enough, we shouldn't need this process. That's, I think, for you to decide. I'm not going to make a blanket statement like that. I've had very good wine finish whiskies and very poor wine finish whiskies and everything in the middle. So it's not really a blanket statement that could apply here, and leave that for you to decide. In any case, two different styles or two different approaches to winemaking. Regular wine, regular wine, it seems almost dismissive to call it regular wine, but table wine, etc. And then fortified wine are two different classifications that we'll dive into kind of separately as we go through this. We must also understand, I think, the difference between wine cask finishing and full maturation. So there are legal definitions in the technical file, which is the Irish government document that has now that forms part of European law. It was developed by the Department of Agriculture with advisory from whiskey organizations, whiskey representative organizations. It created the technical file, the technical guidelines for what whiskey could and couldn't be, and it was adopted into European law. It now governs the production of Irish whiskey. Maturation is mentioned in this technical file, and the maturation, how it's mentioned is that whiskey in Ireland must be matured for a period of no less than 3 years or 36 months on the island of Ireland in a wooden cask, made out of a wood such as oak. We can use other woods, cherry, acacia, mulberry, any kind of wood we want to, that's suitable, that's not going to poison us. We wouldn't be using yew trees, but we'd be using anything that wouldn't poison us, and to experiment. And maturation is mentioned in the technical file, but finishing isn't. So maturation means the full term of a spirit's time in wood. That varies. The minimum is 3 years. I think the oldest Irish whiskey that's out there at the moment is probably the 47-year-old Middleton Very Rare Silent Distillery. There'll be a 48-year-old, a 49-year-old, a 50-year-old. But whiskey can be aged for as long as is humanly possible based on evaporation and recasking and quality, etc. You would rare to see a whiskey older than 30, 35 years. Very rare. So maturation is mentioned, finishing isn't. So what is finishing? Finishing is a methodology that was developed in the very near past. When it comes to the timeline of whiskey production, finishing is a relatively new approach. And what it basically means is that a maturation took place in an initial barrel, which would most typically have been a bourbon barrel, American oak barrel, a barrel made of American oak that used to contain an American whiskey, a bourbon, for example. And let's say after 7 or 8 years in the bourbon barrel, the whiskey, which is now mature, past its 3 years, is taken out of that barrel and it's put into another barrel or a cask. I use those two terms differently. A barrel is what I would refer to as a 200 or a 225 liter size wooden vessel, but a cask is every size, 500 liter sherry butts, 50 liter quarter casks, etc. In any case, recasking into a different barrel that previously contained something else like a wine. It might have contained a sherry, it might have contained a red Burgundy or a Bordeaux or a white Burgundy, or it might have contained a Spanish wine, an Italian wine, who knows. And that finishing period is really anyone's guess what it can be. And it's not driven by law. It's driven by decisions, subjectivity, skill, noses, palates that taste and evaluate and determine now it's done. A finishing period might be a month. A finishing period might be 10 years. Where it goes from finishing to what might be called recasking or a second maturation is completely marketing speak. So you as a marketer working for a whiskey company could decide, I'm going to call my 5-year finishing a recasking or a second maturation. No problem. There are whiskeys that have gone through 19-year finishes or 25 or 20-year finishes, for example. It's not a crazy thought, but is then a finish or is it a second maturation? We can argue that all day long. In any case, they're not governed. It's not governed by law. So a wine cask finish would be a previously aged spirit or wine. It might not have become a full-term whiskey yet. Typically, the wine cask finishes tend to be full cask or full term maturations past the 3 years that are then transferred. It doesn't have to be. And it goes into a barrel, a cask that used to contain a red wine, for example. Of course, that barrel is empty, but inside that wood is the remnants of whatever that previous inhabitant was, red wine, Burgundy, Bordeaux, Pinot Noir, you name it. And the finishing period will add some flavor, some texture, some softening. There'll be additive processes happen with the spirit and the wood. There'll be subtractive processes. There'll be some combination processes where the chemical nature and the chemical makeup of the spirit and the wood will do their work and they create new flavors. And it's completely trial and error. And some distilleries do it really, really well. And they've been doing it for 40 years. Others are still trying to figure it out. But in any case, that's what wine cask finishing is. And a full maturation would be the full term in that full maturation term, whether it hopped over between different barrels in that time. Full maturation typically covers all of that. There are examples of there being full maturation in a wine cask, like an all sherry cask aged whiskey or an all port cask aged whiskey. All right. Okay. So let me have a sip here and wet my lips while I look at your comments before I go on here. All right, you're all having your own chats. Perfect. So, examples of wine casks that are used in the world of Irish whiskey are likes of Pinot Noir, Burgundy, Bordeaux, Cabernet Sauvignon, and these are some regions as well as types here, Zinfandel, Barolo. And these have started to come in more quantities in the past few years. Ireland has always been a great country for wine consumption, a great country. Even bigger wine consumption for many years in Ireland per capita than the United Kingdom. And for a long time, that was the case with sherry as well. So we have a great history of wine drinking in Ireland. Lots of these wine casks now are finding their way into the world of Irish whiskey, but they did historically too. But we didn't have the wood management skills historically that we do today. So wood management programs didn't exist 60, 70 years ago. Really, we're looking to the 1980s, 1990s, when we started to really pay attention to wood science and understand what's happening and have a program where good wood was paired with good whiskey. If we go back 150 years and we look at examine the casks that were used then, we're going to see big changes. There was often cases where distilleries were just taking whatever kind of vessel that wasn't going to leak, they could. It didn't matter what was in there before. Sometimes those barrels would be lit on fire on the inside with sulfur to burn off anything that you didn't want inside there, but you ended up being left with a bit of sulfur on the nose or on the palate as well. But barrels could contain anything: fish, grain, oil, petrol, you name it. Who knows? Often those things didn't end up typically in the world of whiskey, but I share that lightheartedly, really kind of paint a picture that any barrel that could be found was used historically, which meant that there was a lack of consistency. Whereas today, now there would have been lots of wine barrels that were used. They were coming into the ports in Dublin, in Waterford, in Cork, in Belfast. And when those barrels were empty, they were used for wine or for whiskey aging and for other uses, furniture, etc. as well. So those are some examples of wine casks that are used in the world of Irish whiskey. Fortified wine casks we're quite familiar with. As we move up the ladder of Irish whiskey interest, we find ourselves entering the world of more specialty finishes, specialty aging methodologies, longer aging, more expensive barrels or cask types that are being used. And we'll find ourselves in the world of sherries and ports and Madeiras and Malagas, Marsalas, etc. And these are examples of fortified wines. And fortified wines are simply wines that are typically protected with a geographical indicator, GI status. So every one of these fortified wines listed here are actually representative of regions or, in fact, entire countries. So sherry is the English word for Jerez, the region in the southwest of Spain. The Sherry Triangle, 3 towns there where the grapes that grow around those 3 towns are used for sherry making. We say sherry today because the British couldn't pronounce the local language when they tried to conquer the area, and they asked where they were, and the locals said, "You're in Jerez." And they said, "Oh, sherry, perfect." And it's just been sherry ever since. Port, of course, refers to Portugal and the entire region of Portugal, really. Now, Porto, on the western seaboard there of the Iberian Peninsula, and the river, the Douro River, and the Douro River Valley is where we're going to find a lot of port. But that is a regional kind of geographical indicator protecting the wines that come from there. Madeira, Portuguese island off the west coast of Africa, kind of in the mid-Atlantic. Marsala, obviously, is a Sicilian area. Malaga, Spanish region. And these are all wines that are fortified. In other words, during the winemaking process, depending on the fortified wine, this will vary. And I'm sure Eric and others who have a better knowledge of this will weigh in to add or to correct where needed. But during the winemaking process, where you've got your grapes, you've got your water, you've got your yeast, you've got your fermentation happening, either during fermentation or before or after. As the yeast is converting the sugars into alcohol, a high alcohol spirit, typically a grape brandy, for example, is added into the liquid, into the mix, and that kills off the yeast. Yeast can't live at high alcoholic strengths. The yeast dies off, which means that no more sugars can be converted into alcohol, which means you maintain some of the sweetness from the grapes, and now you've got the high alcohol from the grape brandy that was added in, and so you've got a high alcohol sweet wine that is fortified, and fortified being the addition of the brandy. The purpose it serves was historically for preservation. The wines going on long journeys needed to last weeks on ships, going through different climatic conditions, rough seas, Bay of Biscay, sun, rain, sleet, snow, you name it. And the risk of wine arriving spoiled to a port was high. And so whether it was the Spanish or the Portuguese who came up with the idea first, they can argue about themselves. The Portuguese seem to claim it, but fortification really started to happen there. And so those wines would have been very much enjoyed in Ireland and United Kingdom in the 1800s and the first half of the 1900s. Today, not so much. The market for these wines to drink domestically and enjoy with your dinner has kind of waned. In the 1980s, the Spanish government stopped the shipping of sherry casks from Spain. They wanted to both control the quality and probably provide some jobs in Spain as well. All the bottling for sherry now happens in Spain, which means if we want a sherry cask like we've used for 200 years in Ireland for whiskey maturation, we have to order it in advance. We have to have it seasoned with sherry. It has to stay there for about 2 years seasoning while the wine soaks into the wood. It's then dumped out. They send the cask empty to Ireland where whiskey is then added. So it's kind of a artificial process that mimics how it was done historically. Again, purists will argue that that's a fake process. You're you're not really utilizing the resources that are available to you today. You're trying to live in the past. Your decision. It's up to you. But anyway, these we talk about things like the spot range of whiskies. The spot range of whiskies actually have all, if I'm not mistaken, all 5 of those have found their way into one spot or another. Port, isn't port and gold spot, or is it just red wine? I have to double check. Somebody will tell me. All right, so let's talk about some of the examples of the of wine cask, either finishes or maturations, to just dive into them and see the different styles of them. If you're a wine drinker, and let's be honest, there's far more wine drinkers than there are whiskey drinkers, and so this is a chance for a bit of crossover. If you know a wine drinker, you might be able to recommend to them a whiskey that could open their eyes to the world of Irish whiskey by showing them a whiskey that maybe utilizes the wine that they're used to drinking, whether it's a Bordeaux or a Burgundy or Pinot Noir or whatever it is. You may be able to introduce them to whiskey, and they may detect some of the flavors that they're used to. They may get a greater appreciation. So it's a great kind of crossover. The Scottish utilize wine casks in the finishing side of things, mostly because they don't have a lot of flavors to play with, in the sense of, and this is not a dig on the Scots. I'll happily take a dig, give a dig wherever I can, but their laws don't allow them to use different types of wood. They're just stuck with oak. They can't use cherry, acacia, mulberry. Those are the preserve of the Irish. We're very fancy, and other jurisdictions, but they will use the wine cask as kind of a finishing, and it helps. It's allowed. It's permitted. One of the few kind of flavor permissions in the Scottish technical file. So it's found its way in there to do that. But the Irish are using it in addition to interesting wood types finished. Clonakilty Double Oak. So Clonakilty is a destination on our Whiskey Bus tour in August. It's a distillery in West Cork, in the town of Clonakilty. I know we've got a lot of Clonakilty fans. I'm a Clonakilty fan. They are sourcing their whiskey currently, and they will be releasing their first whiskey, I would say, in the next 12 months. Is my prediction. They make only pot still whiskey in their distillery, but they have released whiskies that are blends of malt and grain. They've released some single grains. They've released some single malts. This is one example of a blend, and actually won best blended whiskey in the World Whiskey Awards, beating out the Jamesons, the Powers, the Tullamore Dews of the world. This is Clonakilty Double Oak, and one of the interesting wine components here is the use of ex-red wine casks, so French oak casks that used to contain Bordeaux wine, that have gone through a process that strips the inside of the cask. Once it's finished being used for red wine, it finds its way to Clonakilty, let's say, and there in Clonakilty or in the cooperage in France, the inside of the barrel is shaved. So the staves are shaved, strips out the tannins, strips out elements of the wine, and it gives you a barrel that has that is then retoasted. Once it's kind of been shaved down, the staves have been reshaved down. You've got now what you've almost got is almost like a virgin French oak cask that has never been used before, because you've taken away all of the elements that were in there before. But you're getting access to the French oak, and the oak is actually what gives you a lot of the flavors that we would typically associate with the inhabitant of the cask. It's often the wood notes and the wood sugars that are giving us more of the flavors than the wine or the inhabitant that's in there before. Ger Buckley is the master cooper, the man in charge of the wood and repairing the barrels in Middleton Distillery. He's been doing it for 47 years. And Ger has a great party trick that he does whenever he's demonstrating this fact to people that the wood has an impact. He'll bring an empty barrel to tastings, and he'll have people stick their nose into the barrel. And he said, give that a smell. Tell me what you smell. And everyone will say, oh my God, it smells like a lovely whiskey, beautiful whiskey in there. And Ger is his moment to shine. You can see his face lighting up. He's been perfectly teed up for this. And he stares at everyone. He says, would you believe me if I told you that barrel never saw whiskey? What you're smelling is the oak, is the wood. And everyone's like, oh, it's amazing. We can't believe it. And it's a great demonstration to show that it's the wood that gives us a lot of the flavor and a lot of the profile that we detect in our whiskeys today. Yes, the inhabitant of the cask makes a difference. So then this is a process called where the casks that we get are called New Era of Cask or New Era Oak Cask, depending on the abbreviation and who is giving it to you. Neoc casks are finding their way into not just the world of Irish whiskey. They're finding their way into rum. They're finding their way into Scotch. They're finding their way into bourbons or American whiskies. And it is a way to get access to that French almost like a virgin French oak cask that previously had an inhabitant in it. So Clonakilty Double Oak, I like this. It's a really soft, approachable blended whiskey, a blend of malt and grain, aged for about 8 to 10 years. And it's a really enjoyable one. Bob says it just placed first in a blind tasting of 20 Irish whiskies. Kristen says that's her favorite Clonakilty. They have lots of wine casks, Bordeaux, port. They do indeed. I want to bring this one up because of the Neoc. So next time you hear Neoc, you'll know it's new era of cask or new era oak cask. And shaving. There's one cooperage that how they treat the cask in this process is they apply jets of water, a stream of high powered jets of water inside the cask that strips out the layers, the previous kind of lignins and kind of the makeup of that cask is just completely stripped out to the point where there's grooves being made on the inside staves from the pressure of the water. And what that does is it creates extra surface area for the cask. Now, I don't know if that's allowed or not in the world of Irish whiskey. There was trouble in the past over sticking bungs of oak into a cask that were sticking out of the head of the cask in there as well, as if that might not be totally kosher. But in any case, that's one approach that I've seen them deployed in France. Teeling single grain. This is one of the early ones. So this has been out in the market since I think about 2013. This is and it's the winner of the best single grain at the Irish Whiskey Awards, I think in 2013. Teeling single grain red wine cask. Some of you may have had that. And it's one of the early uses of a single grain, which is a whiskey made predominantly with maize or corn. Typically, we can also make it with wheat, but it's made in column stills. Can contain up to 30% barley, but malted barley, but typically would contain only about 5% malted barley. And so that is another interesting use, one of the early uses of red wine, again, in the world of Irish whiskey. The Quiet Man single malt. This is a 12-year-old single malt that's available quite widely actually in the United States. And this is a Bordeaux cask finish. So up to 12 years in bourbon casks, bourbon barrels, and then transferred into a barrel that previously contained red wine. French oak, fantastic wood. The French look at their forests like they treat them like they're a part of their military. In fact, they count their forests as being a wing of their military, because historically their forests were the source of the resources to build their warships. Before they moved on to hunks of steel and metal and iron, it was the forest that gave them the wood that allowed them to build the ships. And so these were very well protected. In fact, to this day, the French forestry management system is extremely well managed, and they take it very, very seriously. Bordeaux casks finding their way to Ireland, where whiskies are spent. So the Quiet Man spent, I think, up to about 6 or 9 months maturing or finishing, you see. Again, interchangeable words, probably finishing is the best one here, in a Bordeaux cask. What's the right amount of time per, whether it's a single malt or single pot still pairing with a Bordeaux cask or a Pinot Noir or Burgundy or white Burgundy, whatever it might be? And the answer is nobody knows, or they don't know until they try it. So there's a lot of trial and error. So a lot of management and testing and tasting and evaluating of the spirit, I think, goes on when things go into experimental casks. As the distillery gets more established and they have more of a wood management program and they have more consistency and record keeping and data to look at, they'll start to be able to predict what a flavor profile should be. If X, Y, and Z are in place, then we should get this result. Distilleries like Bushmills and Middleton Distillery will have such volume that they'll have a good idea of the profile they'll get, so long as the barrel is of a certain size and a certain standard, contained a certain thing, was paired with a certain distillate for X amount of time in a certain place. This is what we should get. So it's quite formulaic or predictable or consistent, depending on the phrase you want to use, as the distillery gets more established and bigger. So there's no rule as to how long it should be in. Now, you could argue that things like lighter whiskeys, like a grain whiskey, which would typically be more floral, lighter in notes, might pair better with a lighter whiskey so it doesn't become overpowered. So what those who love a good distillate are going to say is, I don't want the wine cask to overpower it. And those who love wine are going to say, I don't want the distillate to overpower it. And that's a personal choice. So you're going to, as to what you like and where you'll find it. But a lighter whiskey might pair better with a lighter wine cask. A more robust, heavier textured whiskey might be better suited to a richer, sweeter, heavier textured fortified wine as an example. But it's not one rule fits all. But it's a bit like pairing wine with chocolate, pairing wine with food. A little bit of trial and error as you go. Lots of different Bordeaux grapes, of course, says Eric. Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, Malbec, and Carmenere. I'd like the distilleries to share more with us about what was the provenance of the cask, if it's known, and it's not always known. So when we released our whiskey here, the Crack, this is a 12-year-old single grain, which we finished for, was it almost 9 months, 6 months, I think, 6 months in a California style Madeira cask, which is an ambitious title. 12 years in single grain, and then we put into Madeira. Now, Madeira, you might on first thoughts think, well, that's a bit rich and a bit heavy to be pairing with a single grain, but it took a long time to get the flavors out of the cask. But we didn't know historically all the provenance. We knew some of it. We knew it contained we thought it contained a white wine historically, and Sauvignon Blanc in the French oak cask previously. And beyond that, we don't know. But if we knew all the provenance of it, it might help with the storytelling as well. And I think consumers are going to demand more of that going forward. Help me understand fully. Don't just tell me it's a red wine cask. Don't tell me, what is it? Was it Cabernet Franc? Was it Merlot? Was it Carmenere? What was it? And that'll be helpful for us too to start to match up profiles of whiskies with what maybe we're used to drinking in our wine glass. So we know when it says Blue Nun, okay, that's a Blue Nun cask. Okay, perfect. Ideal. Greg said the smaller barrels worked fantastically well with the Cliffs and Moher. They did. So look, the barrel aging and maturing is both a science and an art, but there are things we know about it scientifically. The larger the barrel, I suppose the smaller the less surface area there is for the liquid in terms of ratios. The smaller the barrel, the more the better ratio there is. The more of the liquid is interacting with the wood, and more of the wood, and so it can mature or advance or evolve quicker. Now, you can't change time. You can't suddenly fast forward time, but you can change the rate at which changes happen in your barrel. So a smaller barrel, we would have more pronounced flavor changes quicker than we would with a very large cask that might take a much longer period of time. Oh, Blue Nun is a great favorite in Ireland. This is a quality, Eric. This is quality wine you're hitting on now. That would have cost you about £2 on the shelf back in the 1990s and 1980s in Ireland. Every house had a bottle of Blue Nun. Keane's putting the Oscars on the background. Keep us posted there now, folks. Oh, yeah, the Oscars coming up. If the Irish win, we're cracking open bottles. We're cracking open bottles. For every Oscar that the Irish win, well, you can tell me. You can recommend what I do. All right. Let's talk about the Wine Geese series. And that's a chance for us to do a little bit of a tasting tonight. The Wine Geese series. So Green Spot, one of the most well-known single pot still whiskies in Ireland, the only surviving single pot still whiskey that existed completely and continuously from the old Bow Street distillery in Dublin, the Jameson distillery in Dublin, which was opened in 1780, closed in 1975. Green Spot survived the move from Bow Street in Dublin down to Middleton in County Cork. It was the only single pot still whiskey that you could buy in the mid-1980s, early 1990s, when even Redbreast itself was not in production. Redbreast was out of production for about 6 years, I think. Maybe 85, 91. I can't remember exactly. Green Spot wasn't. Green Spot continued. It's got a cult following. It's the whiskey that gets a lot of people into Irish whiskey. Those who are wine drinkers, those who are bourbon drinkers, find Green Spot to be a fantastic entry point. Very unique flavors, very approachable. Green apples, grass, pepper spice, but it's a unique drink. Whiskey historian Fionnán O'Connor talks about discovering Green Spot in a bar in San Francisco and being completely converted into this idea of into this category of single pot still whiskey. 2015, Middleton Distiller, the custodians of the brand, together with the Mitchell family, the Mitchell and Son brand is adorned on every bottle of Spot whiskies. Mitchell family collaborated with Middleton Distillery to release the first in what became a series over the past 8 years called the Wine Geese series. The Wine Geese. Who are the Wine Geese? And why are geese involved in my whiskey making? The Wine Geese are a group of Irish people, typically Irishmen who emigrated from Ireland in the 1700s, late 1600s, 1700s, and took, maybe they went to fight in wars overseas, or they were they left Ireland after certain skirmishes, and they ended up setting up wineries in different parts of the world. And there's a little snippet I'm going to read out for you that I downloaded from an article about the wine geese. And it says, between the banks of the Garonne and Dordogne rivers lies one of the principal wine-producing regions of the world. The famous Bordeaux red or claret is its most iconic product and one of the nation's leading exports, with more than 700 million bottles produced every year. The people of Ireland have long been fond of it. In the year 1740 alone, Ireland imported over 4,000 caskets compared to the thousands that were sent to England. And one English peer feared this would be the ruin of Ireland, as, quote, the affectation of drinking wine has got into the middle and lower ranks of people. Now, you can't have the poor drinking. Yet the reason such large quantities of French wines were making their way to Ireland wasn't because of an Irish proclivity for a good vintage. It was because a group of exiled Irishmen dubbed the wine geese had in fact turned their hands to wine growing and used their familial connections to practically monopolize exports to Ireland. So, when Thomas Jefferson, the inaugural American ambassador to France and later president, paid a visit to Bordeaux in 1787, he reported that the leading wine producers of the region were the Bartons, Johnsons, Fosters, Skinners, Coppingers, and McCarthy families. Skibbereen-born Abraham Lawton was considered the most influential wine broker in the city, and the Kerwin, Clark, Dillon, Phelan, and Lynch families also held positions of prominence. And while there, Lawton advised Jefferson on what wines should be purchased on behalf of the United States President George Washington. However, it's probably Cork-born Richard Hennessy whose legacy is the most widely recognized today. You know the word Hennessy, cognac. He's from Cork, near Mallow. And he wasn't destined to inherit his estate in Cork, and he opted instead for a career in the military. So he left to go overseas and fight in the military. But him and his son purchased a winery. And they established Hennessy as the leading French brandy of the late 1700s and early 1800s. So the Irish went overseas, started the wineries, and then because they were also the brokers and the distributors and the exporters, they established the trade routes to Ireland. So these wine geese who, it's almost like the geese flew away and then they sent their goods back, the wine geese. So when Green Spot collaborated with Mitchell & Son to release the Wine Geese series, they were looking to wineries that had Irish connections. Every winery that had an Irish connection was examined, and casks from certain wineries were identified as being suitable and approached, etc. And Green Spot was put into those casks for a finishing period. It could be 6 months, could be a year, depending on the particular finish. The first one released was Chateau Leoville Barton. You see it here on the screen. There's the label of Leoville Barton in the Saint-Julien region. Chateau Leoville Barton, a very well-known Bordeaux producer. And that was the first of the series where Green Spot Irish whiskey, which is typically aged for about 7, 9, maybe 10 years, components in there, it's put into casks that used to contain the former wine from a winery. The Barton family, again, the Bartons are proud Irish people who together with the Leoville family, created some of the most well-known, one of the most well-known chateaus in Bordeaux. And it is there, that was the first stop for the Mitchell family and Middleton Distillery for their Green Spot collaboration for the first ever wine geese. The Mitchell family are great wine importers themselves, and they'd be more well known probably for their wine selling and their wine ranges even than they are for their Spot range of whiskies. So it's a great collaboration from both the distillery side, the winery side, the Mitchell family side. Such great knowledge in whiskey and wine being shared. I think we're the richer for it. Chateau Leoville Barton may be my favorite of the Green Spots, of any Green Spot, original wine finished, etc. One of my favorite. 2 years later, 2017, Chateau Montelena was the next one, which is a collaboration with Californian winery Chateau Montelena. Again, Irish family connections, and the scene of the Judgment of Paris. What's the famous movie? You're going to tell me in the comments, where for the first time American wine in a blind tasting competition in Paris, was it 1977, 76, was judged to be better blind than French, Spanish, Italian wines. And this caused uproar in the wine world, didn't it? And it was Chateau Montelena's wine that was the it was the Chardonnay, wasn't it? I think that was the one judge the best. And I recreated Napa, created Sonoma as kind of this wine, that wine from California, Northern California, could be amazing and could stand up against the rest. Chateau Montelena's Zinfandel is what's used. Those casks are used for the maturation or the finishing period, 6 to 9 months perhaps, of Chateau Montelena Green Spot. Bottle Shock, that's it. Bottle Shock is the name of the movie. So the Weingeese series would have been the first to mainstream the finishing of whiskey in wine casks in Ireland. 2015 seems like a lifetime ago, 8 years ago. In the world of Irish whiskey, that is a long time ago, because at the time in 2015, there were only 4 distilleries on the island that could actually sell whiskey, because they're the only ones that had it aged. So 2015 was a long time ago, but not that long ago, 8 years ago. 8 years ago. Yeah, there's a great Irish connection, Caroline, in Chateau Montelena. It's Bo, what's his name? Bo Barrett is the winemaker there. And he's the son of, it was his father, Jim Barrett. 1973 was when their vintage Chardonnay won the first prize at the Judgment of Paris. Oh yeah, the 1973 vintage won it at the 1976 Judgment. That's right. And he was an assistant. Bo Barrett was an assistant at the time during that vintage, working under the tutelage of Mike Grigich. All right. That's right. Chateau Montelena was bought by Barrett. I think he was he an attorney maybe in San Francisco, or he was in finance in San Francisco, I think, and he purchased Chateau Montelena and transformed it. Next up, let's talk about some fortified wine cask whiskey. So those are examples, just briefly there, of wine finishes. So the Weingeese. Oh yeah, let's go back to it because we have to try it. We have to try. I've got one here. The next one, Green Spot Quails Gate. All right, let's try a drop of Quails Gate. So this was the most recent release, and this is the first collaboration with a winery outside of I was going to say outside of Europe, but it's not, of course. Chateau Montelena in California. This is a Canadian winery, Quails Gate, Canadian winery. And this is the last collaboration. Look at the color of that bottle. Isn't it very pink or orangey, or what do you even call that? Ruby. There's a ruby note to it. Quails Gate Winery. Give you some information on that here. Okay, so this is a Green Spot again, which is aged in Pinot Noir casks, finished in Pinot Noir casks. So again, Green Spot's DNA is a combination of ex-bourbon barrels and ex-Oloroso sherry casks, predominantly ex-bourbon barrels that are used. And then those spirits are matured independently and then married together in the ratios that the distillery deems appropriate for what Green Spot is. They don't talk about those ratios, but those whiskeys are matured separately, spirits are matured separately, and then married together to create the Green Spot we know. And then the combined spirit is then transferred, the combined whiskey is then transferred into casks that previously contained Pinot Noir. The Quails Gate Winery is in Canada in the Okanagan Valley, and they are well known, renowned for their Pinot Noirs, lending plenty of red berry wine influence to the Green Spot profile we know and love. So, top that up a little bit here. Did anybody get a bottle of this yet? Quails Gate, Green Spot Quails Gate, making its way across the United States at the moment. Copper, that's it. Nice copper hue. Isn't that lovely? So I tasted this during the week. Really, really enjoyed it. Found that it took about 10 minutes to open up in my glass. So I'm going to get very different notes now than I will in 10 minutes time. But you do get that kind of red berry note. And you get a hint of the tartness that's going to come on the palate, because I remember very clearly when I tasted, there's a real tartness that followed the sweetness. A little hint of kind of almost like oak dusting or oak, almost sawdust. A little bit on the nose. A little sláinte there. We'll have a little taste of this. Bottled at 46%. Lovely juiciness. You definitely get the red notes. You definitely get the red berries. I liken this to a candy we have in Ireland called strawberries and cream. Tried to find some earlier. It wouldn't be too unlike a kind of a sweet that might look like that. Very creamy. Lovely sweetness on the tip of the tongue. Even carries through to the kind of the mid palate. And then there's both a tartness and a spice that comes behind it. I think the notes talk about cranberries, which is a good note, because notes of dried cranberries and red apple, which are absolutely present. And somehow the sweetness and the tartness, they kind of dance with one another. I talk about them complementing. Sweet comes first, a little bit of tartness comes after, and they dance together, and then they kind of finish in a kind of a peppery finish. Good long length to it. It's going to change and evolve here. I ranked this during the week as, and I'll come back to the tasting notes on it as it evolves. I ranked this during the week above Chateau Montelena, above regular Green Spot, under Chateau Leavel Barton, richer, more robust wine. This is lighter. And while Pinot Noir gives us kind of those juiciness, I find that it's a little bit lighter than the Chateau Leavel Barton. And I love a richer, more full-bodied flavor profile. Quails Gate will be available across the United States for a limited time. It's not a permanent addition to the range. Wherever you see the likes of Chateau Leavel Barton Green Spot, Chateau Montelena Green Spot is most likely where you'll see Quails Gate, but it won't be available forever. So this is the first edition that is not a permanent edition. The other two have been permanently available, Chateau Montelena and Leavel Barton. So whether it's a supply issue in terms of the casks, I don't know. Whether it's a smaller winery, perhaps, and they don't have availability of the casks, who knows? In any case, it's not, the word from the distillery is it's not a permanent SKU, but it's already on the way. It's on shelves in Canada, on shelves in Ireland, and it's making its way across the United States right now. Let's talk about we're on the spot whiskies. We might as well talk about fortified wine casks. So the entire spot range of whiskeys, that whole series, Blue Spot, Green Spot, Red Spot, Yellow Spot, Gold Spot, all have fortified wine casks as their backbone, part of their DNA. Sherry casks are across the range, and then the various spots will have different additional wine casks that are used. What's important to note about the rest of the spot series is that they're not finishes. In other words, Blue Spot is a marriage of pot still whiskies that were aged individually for their full term in ex-bourbon, American oak casks, ex-Oloroso sherry casks, European oak, and European oak ex-Madeira casks. And they were all aged independently. Madeira casks up to 19 years of age, some of the bourbon and sherry up to 7 or 8 years of age, the youngest being 7, the oldest being about 19 or 20. They were then married together at the end. None of them are finished. So when you see on the label of a Blue Spot where it says Madeira casks, bourbon barrels, sherry butts, and Madeira casks, don't confuse that for being a finishing. It's actually a full maturation of that component in there. It's the same with Yellow Spot. Yellow Spot being bourbon, sherry, and Malaga, isn't it? That is a full maturation of each of them for 12 years. In bourbon barrels for 12 years, in sherry casks for 12 years, in Malaga casks for 12 years. So each of them were aged separately and then married together. Doesn't mean it's a 36-year-old whiskey. They're all maturing concurrently and then married together at the end. Fortified wine casks are everywhere in the world of Irish whiskey right now, and predominantly it's the use of sherry casks or sherry butts to give them their rightful name. A butt being a unit of measurement, 500 liters approximately in size. I often share that if you've asked somebody for a buttload of something and they haven't brought you 500 liters of it, they should be sent back to get you the balance due to you. But a lot of sherry cask maturation being used. For example, there are entire maturations that have taken place in sherry cask. So like you'll see an example here on the screen of a Redbreast all sherry cask. This is for example, a Redbreast 26-year-old all sherry cask that was matured entirely in sherry cask for 26 years, one sherry cask. And whatever it yielded at the end of its maturation is what it gave in terms of number of bottles. In the middle, we've got the Liberator, which is a tawny port cask finish. So that is not a full maturation. It is a tawny port cask finish. Tawny ports being older ports, and it is finished for a small period of time in those casks. And then on the right-hand side, which we'll talk about in a second, is Thomond Gate's Ruby port cask finish, which is a single malt, which has also been transferred into a port cask or a port pipe, to give it its correct name. If it's a full port pipe, maybe anywhere from 450 to 550 liters in size. And it has spent a little period of time, could be a few months, in that port cask to add those additional notes to the single malt. So fortified wine cask whiskies, I've got a few here that I want to put up and talk about. So of different styles. So for example, we just talked about the Quails Gate from Green Spot, but also we talked about Blue Spot. Again, remember, individual maturations of the components that are then married together. I don't use the word blended because that confuses us, blending being two different styles of whiskey, but these are all pot still styles. So it's just more of a marriage or a marrying of whiskies. Our own whiskey, the Crack, was a fortified wine cask finish. It was a Madeira cask, California style Madeira cask finish for 6 months, which gave us kind of richer fruit notes as well, and kind of a creaminess to that. So that was a finish. But there's others, for example, you got a 19-year-old WD O'Connell. That is a 19-year-old single malt that has been finished in a Pedro Jimenez cask. 17 years of its life was spent in bourbon barrels, and then it spent an extra 30 months in a Pedro Jimenez sherry cask. Pedro Jimenez would be kind of the sweetest of all of the sherries. But almost every whiskey now is using fortified wine casks, either as a finishing, part maturation, full maturation. Jameson, the best-selling Irish whiskey in the world, is a combination of bourbon barrel aged whiskey and sherry cask, or also sherry cask aged whiskey. And those two married together give us Jameson. And, well, in addition to it being pot still whiskey and grain whiskey that are aged in those. Incidentally, grain whiskies will typically go into bourbon barrels so that the wood doesn't overpower them, whereas pot still whiskies will go into a combination of both bourbon barrels and sherry casks. But it'd be rare to see a grain whiskey go straight into a sherry cask for its maturation. I don't think I know of any examples of that happening. Stacey's Quails Gate is on the way. Daniel wants to know if Blue Spot is going to have a batch 3. I think I heard that there is a batch 3 already out, as far as I know. Somebody was asking me about batch 4 the other day at a tasting, asking me if I'd seen any batch 4s. I have no idea where the batch is. There batch numbers on these bottles? I can't find it if there is. I know there is on likes of Redbreast 27. And that's another great example. Redbreast 27 is a very high percentage, not a very high percentage, a good percentage of pot still whiskey that was aged up to 31, 32 years in ruby port casks, adding a lovely, lovely note of plums, juicy black currants. And that's coming from a mixture of the inhabitants of the wood and the wood itself, that European oak wood. Just getting here, says Stacey. Hit the like button and help people find the Shebeen. Thanks for that. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. So let me get your thoughts on whiskies that are aged in wine casks, aged in fortified wine casks, finished in wine casks. The purists say it's not the way to do it. The purists say we should go by the strength of one distillate in one barrel for one period of time, and that's the true measure, stripped back measure of the quality of the skill of the distiller, the quality of the wood, the quality of the distillate. But it's up to you. What do you think? I am a huge fan of rich fortified wine, matured and finished whiskies. Absolutely love them. Give me a Pedro Jimenez cask finished whiskey, single malt or pot still all day long. Give me a port cask finished or aged single malt or single pot still, and I'd be happy for the night. I'd be happy for the night. But they're not for everybody. Some people will insist on just the barrel that I went into. If I bet you would struggle to name 7 Irish whiskies that were aged just in bourbon barrels. The most well-known would be, or just in American oak barrels, the most well-known would be Middleton Very Rare. Middleton Very Rare doesn't use any wine casks, fortified wine casks in its maturation. Barry Crockett, the creator of that series back in 1984, big fan of American oak. Loved his bourbon barrels. The Sexton's sherry, isn't it? The what's all bourbon? Red Bushmills Red. The whiskey, the barrel makers are those who supply the wine casks from fortified wine regions in Portugal and Spain and Italy. They are really dependent on, well, they would love to see a resurgence in the world of fortified wines. There is some in the world of craft whiskey, craft cocktail making. You see sherry and port and Madeira is becoming a little bit more fashionable, but not in a mainstream way. But if we're to continue having whiskeys that have a wine maturation or a wine cask finish or a fortified wine cask finish, well, we need all stages of the production process to be healthy and sustainable. For example, we need there to be winemakers who grow the style of wine that gets turned into these wines, a style of grapes that gets turned into these wines. We need the coopers and the cooperages that can make the barrels and season the barrels with these wines. And we need people to, in order for that kind of supply chain piece to be in place. But it's not for everybody. I think some of you might like not having a wine influence with your whiskey and keeping those two separate, keeping the grape and the grain separate. Others might like them to be combined. Depends on what you're in the mood versus keen, distillate driven, wood driven, or finish. Different days call for different whiskey. So you take the likes of Powers whiskey, so a popular brand of whiskey in Ireland and increasingly so in the United States, thankfully. Powers is mostly distillate driven and mostly bourbon barrel driven, a very small percentage of sherry casks. Whereas you go to the likes of Redbreast, huge percentage, not huge, less than it's probably a quarter to a half of sherry casks are used in Redbreast, unless you get up a little bit higher in the category. And the spot whiskies, again, these are fortified wine cask where the distillate takes the back seat. The fortified wine cask, I think, comes to the fore in the spot whiskies. Jerez is still struggling, says Steve, because the current generation isn't drinking it. That's true. And sherry is remarkably cheap for what you're getting. I mean, you can get 40, 50-year-old sherries for the same price we'd pay for a bottle of 6-year-old Irish whiskey. It's astonishing. And on my list is to do Portugal properly and do Spain properly from a fortified wine perspective and really understand it and try and follow that process along, because we don't see it all. We're just seeing the brown liquid in the glass. That's all I got on wine. Just to say, I was hoping that you could take away the difference between wine cask finishes and maturation, the different types are used. Not all cask types or not all wine types work with all styles of distillate. There are some peated whiskies that I know have been trialed in Scotland with red wine finishes that just haven't worked at all. Others have worked remarkably well. I think we're going to see more experimentation, but it is just that. But hopefully it'll open up more people who are already wine drinkers, who are familiar with terms like Cabernet Sauvignon, Zinfandel, Muscat, whatever it is, and they see that in a bottle of whiskey and think, oh, maybe this is a way for me to try a whiskey. That would be the hope. And then if they detect some of the notes that they're used to, maybe they'll stick around and buy more whiskeys because they're comfortable and they feel safe and they feel like it's approachable. So you learned a little bit about wine cask finishing and maturation, and then the difference between fortified wines and regular non-fortified wines, and where they can be used. It's rare to see a full maturation in just a wine cask. I don't know of any. It would typically be a finishing. A wine cask, French oak cask that previously contained just a non-fortified wine seems to be inappropriate, not suitable for long-term aging, whether it's the tannins, whether it's the toasting, the aging. I'm not 100% certain. We do see much longer maturing in Spanish oak, etc., European oak that contain fortified wine, like a sherry, a port, much longer maturations, in fact, entire maturations. Or you take the likes of a Method and Madness 28-year-old, I think 24 of those 28 years were spent in, or 22 of those years were spent in port casks, and the first 4 were spent in bourbon barrels, or 6. So that's a big, long maturation there that was in that cask that previously contained a fortified wine. Rich enjoyed the Tyrconnell, Madeira, and port cask finish. Tom wants a fortified wine bus. Steve spent a bit of time in Jerez. Regrets that he wasn't a bigger drinker back then. All right, let's move on. The Oscars are on. Let us know if are we winning anything yet. Any award winners yet? Somebody please post them in there in the old chat. And if there's an Irish winner, that's it. We're staying up all night. All right, let's move along. We got more to cover. A quick little update on our short cross whiskey. Do I have any here? I have none here. All downstairs. Our short cross whiskey is down to our last 25 bottles. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send out an email this week to our members and letting them know that it's the last chance to buy them, because I'm going to take them off the market and I'm going to use them for private tastings and for group get-togethers in the future. And when they're gone, they're gone. So we've had a fantastic, resounding response to the short cross whiskies. I'm delighted with the support. Thank you all for those who ordered. Thank you. If you want to order another bottle, just go to storiesandsipps.com and you'll find the links under our club tab where it says club whiskies, and you'll find the link to be able to purchase a bottle or 2 or 3 or 5 or however many you want. But these probably won't be available. Probably, there's a 80% chance these won't be available by the time our next whiskey comes around, which I'll talk about in a second. But going forward, depending on the growth of the club and the availability of whiskies, we may end up at a point where we have multiple whiskies for sale at the same time, which means you could bundle them up and save on shipping. You could order 2 or 3 different whiskies that all come from our club that are unique and exclusive to us, and you could bundle them all at the time of your purchase and pay the reduced shipping costs. That's a possibility, but it's not something we can depend on. I think we'll have some that sell out in a day, others sell out in a month, others take longer, but it's a chance for us to try different styles and different whiskeys anyway. We're down to the last 25 bottles. For those that want them, go get them. Eric bought 3 bottles. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for support. All right, Knappogue Castle. We have a great tasting coming up. More than 200 of our club members signed up for tasting kits for our upcoming event, which now registration for the kits is closed. But folks, is it often that you see 3 empty bottles of Knappogue 1951 on one screen? These were all emptied for good cause. This is one of the rarest Irish whiskies in the world. We were lucky enough to get 3 bottles of it for our next tasting. Two of them were kindly donated by Irish distillers. One of them was kindly donated by Barry Chandler by grabbing it off his shelf from his collection. And I broke them all up and sent them for bottling, where up to 70 of our club members will get a sample of these in their tasting kit. This is the tasting kit that's coming out to you in the next week. 70 of those tasting kits will include a sample. Here's the sample of Knappogue Castle 1951. There it is. Come on, camera, find it. Find it. Knappogue Castle 1951. 70 of you will get those. And then, look what else we've got. Another 130 of you. Look at all these I emptied. These are bottles of unreleased single malt from the Middleton Distillery that is destined for Knappogue. Who knows what, whether it's going to be married into another malt, we don't know yet. 23-year-old port cask aged single malt. Cask strength, folks. Cask strength. 130 of you are getting those. There it is. There's the wee sample. Port cask samples drawn from the warehouse in the Middleton Distillery. So that's going. Those kits are all going out. Sorry, registration is closed if you're not yet a member. We'll have more tastings, but that one was an absolute sellout, and we'll have a great time with Dave McCabe, one of the blenders from the Middleton Distillery, who has trained under Billy Lighton, and Dave McCabe is going to lead us through a sensorial tasting of the 1951 whiskey, the 3 standard 12, 14, and 16-year-old whiskies, and the cask sample. Everyone is going to get this, and everyone is going to get another sample of something as well, be it Knappogue 51 or a 23-year-old port cask. Who knows? It's a lottery. It's a lottery. No supporting act or win for the Irish. All right, that's it. Shebeen's over. Shebeen's over. You can register for the Zoom, so the actual event itself takes place on March 27th. Whether you have a kit or you don't, these are club member events that you can join with or without the whiskey. Just go to our Club Whiskies page and register. It's and join in. It'll be Monday the 27th at 7 p.m. Eastern, and Dave McCabe and I will lead the tasting. I'll share the history of Knappogue Castle. Dave will share the sensorial journey of the whiskies. No luck for Brendan Gleeson or for Barry Keoghan. All right. Okay. We struggle on. Let's talk about our next club whiskey. We haven't even the first one sold out yet. I teased this during the week or last week or 2 weeks ago. While I don't have the final whiskey to share with you, I can share with you what we're doing and where we're doing it and who we're doing it with, and that we're almost over the line with them. And that is with the wonderful Ecklinville Distillery in County Down. Ecklinville Distillery, located a mere 30 miles as the crow flies away from Redemin Estate Distillery, home of our last whiskey. We're going to Ecklinville for a Dunville's whiskey release of our own for the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club. I have been through a sampling here over the past few weeks of cask samples that were drawn from the warehouse. This will be an older release. It'll be between 20 and 22 years of age. We're finalizing details right now. I've got a second box like this on the way with second samples of some of these, but other whiskies as well. We're on to around 3 or 4 now to narrow it down. And it'll be a smaller release. It'll be an older release, which makes it a more expensive release. But we'll probably have about 130, 150 bottles of a 20 to 22-year-old single malt from Dunville's exclusively for our club, not available anywhere else. That we're hoping to narrow this down in the next 2 weeks. So by the end of March, I would say anyway, we'll have that bottle chosen. And then very quickly, we're going to be able to bring it to market. So in April, we're going to be able to launch, all going to plan, a Dunville's whiskey exclusive for the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club. Nowhere else in the United States has their own exclusive release. We're going to have one for ourselves. So that's coming up, and it's a big one. It's a really big one. So I'm really excited. I'm really excited for it. A lot of these whiskies are heavily fortified wine finish whiskies. If you know the Dunville's range, you know that it is predominantly coulis distillate, double distilled single malt, where they have done a remarkable job of figuring out finishing in the best way. So we talk about finishing tonight. Jarlath Watson, who's both the chief financial officer and really their lead ambassador, talks about how they have nailed finishing in the distillery by starting with really good distillate. But there's one warehouse. There's just one warehouse in Ecklandville. It's in a unique climate on the eastern seaboard, on the Ards Peninsula, kind of sticking itself out there into the North Sea and the Celtic Sea. And it is a warehouse that is open to the elements, in the sense of the door is open almost every day because people are coming in and out. They do all the bottling in there. They do all the they do a lot of work in that warehouse, as well as storing whiskey. So the doors are always open. A lot of temperature, a lot of wind going in and out. So lots of climatic change and variations in temperature, which Jarlath credits the finishing and the maturation of their whiskies with. So we're going to land on a Oloroso sherry cask finished single malt, a Pedro Jimenez cask finished single malt, a Palo Cortado cask finished single malt. So these are sherry, rich, sweet, fortified wines from Spain that those casks have been sent to Ireland, and this double distilled Cooley single malt has been put into these casks for a period of sometimes years and years and years. So we're going to taste a few more of those. We're going to narrow it down, and then we'll make our choice. And we may even have a backup. We might decide we'll have our first release, and we might have a second one as a backup, and we'll see how we go with that. So hopefully that's exciting to you. I'm very excited to work with Jarlath and Stephen and the team in Ecklandville and Seamus Og. Great bunch up there. Really enjoy working with them. I've spent time with them at the Wexford Whiskey Festival. Talked to Jarlath about it. I co-hosted a tasting event with Jarlath of their new Ecklandville spirits, their pot stills that are they've never released themselves yet, that are being matured. But he was very excited. He said, we have to do something with your crew, with your club over there. He really enjoyed the crack when everyone visited from the whiskey bus. And a lot of our community has built up a good loyalty to the Ecklandville distillery and to the Dunville's brand since that visit, which is great to see. So I'm excited to bring them, and they're a remarkable history. Dunville's history goes all the way back to 1808. Proud, prominent distillery and distiller in Dublin, in Belfast in the 1800s. Went out of business in the early 1900s. Resurrected brand. Great story, great history, and really, really great whiskey. Kevin says, can we just send you our money now? We will get envelopes that perfectly fit a $100 bill. And I know that, so in year one of our club, which was 2022, kind of full year 2022, we released, how many whiskeys did we release? We released one whiskey. We had the crack, just one here. And then then we also had the Cliffs of Moher, didn't we? Yeah. So we the crack came first, and then the Cliffs of Moher came. So we had 4 whiskeys, 3 from the Cliffs of Moher, one from Two Stacks Irish Whiskey. And now this year we're aiming for 8 whiskeys in 2023. We might not get there. We might get 5. We might get 6. We might get 7. I don't know. It'll all come down to availability, logistics, getting things done, timings, availability, resources, etc. And our first whiskey release of 2023 was the Shorecross whiskey. I'm hoping that our next whiskey release is Ecklandville, a Dunville's whiskey. I have teased it in the past, but we can pretty much commit to it now. Our third whiskey of 2023 will be a Killowen whiskey, staying up there in County Down. We're not going far. And that'll be their own distillate, not a sourced whiskey, their own distillate from the Killowen distillery. That'll be ours. And I think we'll take a little visit back to Two Stacks again this year. I think we'll take a visit back to Two Stacks. They just took a delivery of 57 very unusual casks, range of casks. 1 or 2 of them have my attention, and I think it could be a nice thing to dip back to Two Stacks and consider another release, maybe later in the year. But those are 3 that we can talk about as being explored, currently being explored, with the closest chance of coming to market. So stay tuned. Why I mention what's coming is, first, to get you all excited and to get you to put your money aside for them. Second is to tell you that you don't have to buy them all. again, there's no expectation that with every release comes everyone buying every whiskey. Everyone's got a different whiskey budget. I don't want you getting into trouble. I don't want you stretching yourselves. I don't want you buying it because everyone else is buying it. I only want you to buy what you can afford, what you want to buy, not because what you are pressured to buy by anyone you see taking pictures or me with the constant posting about what's coming next. A diverse range of whiskies should be available to a diverse club. And that'll mean that you'll be delighted with some whiskies and others won't meet your interest at all. Some people didn't want a peated whiskey, so they didn't order it. Perfect. Some didn't want a grain whiskey, so they didn't order it. And some didn't want a Cliffs of Moher whiskey, so they didn't order it. And that's perfect, because what we want is a range available for everybody, because for those who buy something that they love and somebody else didn't buy it because they didn't like the thought of it, it leaves that available for the person to reorder a second time. So that's what's going to happen over time, is we'll have a range of whiskies, a range of styles from a range of distilleries and brands at a range of price points, and then you can decide what's right for you. As our club grows, we hope to grow the range of whiskies and the range of whiskies that are available at any one time. But again, no obligation, no obligation. Dave says, "What's a budget?" I know the feeling. I remember my whiskey journey through a series of moments that have stuck in my mind. One of them being not that long ago, but probably in 2016, 2017, meeting somebody who told me that Middleton Very Rare was his daily drinker. I could have died. I didn't know that people drank whiskeys like that every day. I didn't know that was possible. Like, what is this, a man a king? Where's he getting this money? And look how quickly, when we slide into the world of whiskey, how suddenly you're looking at whiskeys that are 200 and 300 going, oh, that's a great price for that whiskey. That's great. It's ridiculous, isn't it? Once it becomes more of a hobby more than a hobby, less than an addiction, hopefully, but more than a hobby and maybe an obsession and a uber interest. It's amazing what we'll spend money on, but $250 on a bottle of whiskey blew my mind. Don't have to buy them all. Ha, try to stop me, says Chris. Tony says, I say that after you spent $300 in the last hour. Are you all in there buying Shortcross whiskies, you are? Oh, yes, I see them. Tom's been in the Whiskey Doghouse. By the way, Middleton Very Rare 2023 is a remarkable drop of whiskey and a really robust whiskey. Traditional pot still whiskey is one of the components in there. Heavy trad pot style. Really, really enjoying the 2023 Middleton Very Rare personally. Okay, so we've talked about our next club whiskey. Folks, let's talk about breaking a world record, shall we? Because that's the kind of jam we're into. Before we do that, let's crack into and talk more about Thomond Gate and Nick Ryan before we move on. But we're coming back to this 10,000 members. Just getting you excited and Guinness World Records. Nick Ryan is a entrepreneurial whiskey company owner. He owns Limerick Whiskey Company, the maker of Thomond Gate whiskey. Thomond Gate is a area in Limerick. Nick is a proud Limerick man, and the Limerick Spirits Company is his company that has released, I think, about 16 whiskies, individual casks, unique cask finishes, unique styles, malt, grain, pot still, etc. over the past 3 years now, I think. I remember talking to him prior to him ever releasing his first whiskey and his fear of taking a thing to market. I remember sitting down with him in a hotel in Cork and talking for an hour and brainstorming every single bottle by hand and putting little coins in with each of his packages and hand sticking the labels on the outside of his tube. Nick has become a friend and is doing really interesting things with Thomond Gate whiskey. This last release of his is the first to arrive in the United States, only about 110 bottles. It's landed at Folsom Wine and Spirits. This is a single malt, 59.97% ABV. It is a single malt that is aged in initially bourbon barrels and then transferred to port casks. And it is, in his words, unaltered cask strength and unaltered, no coloring, non-chill filtered, etc. The color in this is also a lovely copper meets, look at that lovely color. There's almost an orange hue to this. So this one now has been sitting in my glass for 15, 20 minutes, and I found the same when I tried this earlier. It took 10, 15 minutes to open up. I'll come back to the Quails Gate from Green Spot in a second too. Now that's opening up in the glass. But on the nose for this Thomond Gate, luscious red berries dripping in vanilla essence or vanilla cream, a hint of oak, and a hint of maybe it's turmeric. There's a kind of a turmeric, sweet yet very, very pronounced spice note on the nose. Like when you smell a pepper, you know it immediately. All right, we'll take a small sip. Sláinte. Quite spicy, black pepper spice. That turmeric may be coming through as well. There's a sweetness to it. Ginger. Again, that balance of almost like a tartness. Not unlike the Quails Gate we had earlier. But luscious red berries. A little bit of biscuity malt. But a very well-rounded whiskey. A lovely balance. This is a younger malt. I think it's about, is it 5 to 6 years of age? Younger malt. That's been balanced out nicely with this ruby ruby port cask finish. Ruby is a kind of a young, sweet, luscious port fortified wine from the Porto region of Portugal. She'll take water. She'll take a few drops, I'd say. Biscuity malt, red berries, almost like those little, you see them on the side of the road in Ireland, little small round red berries that grow on the trees, or a little hint of raspberry, small little hint of raspberry for me, a little bit of copper, soft vanilla, soft tannins, but also a little bit of a coating. Some tannins there, but not a lot. Soft, but you feel them. Well done to Nick. Another quality release available from Folsom Wine and Spirits. This is not an ad, it's not being paid for, although he did send me the whiskey. But if I didn't like it, I'd tell you. The shipping of one single cask to the US is often a first foray for brands into the market, test the market, see if there's support. So hopefully if you are supporters of Nick, you go and order this. Or you want to get yourself a nice, very unusual ruby port finished single malt. Folsom Wine and Spirits who has them in the United States, and they're in California. They'll ship across the US. We'll keep sipping on that. We'll come back to it. The story of this one, let's have a look at it. Remember I mentioned that Nick is he's not only a proud Limerick man, he's a historian by hobby, and he ties a lot of Irish history to his whiskey releases. He's also growing his own grain in Limerick. He's growing barley. He's growing a bit of rye as well, and he's having that distilled to his specifications. This is this next step from both sourcing his own whiskey to now distilling his own grain to eventually having his own distillery in due course. All part of his long generational plan he has for himself and his family. In a new golden age, we believe Limerick should be known again for its whiskey, as it was historically. As an independent bottler, we have taken the first steps to restore Thomond Gate whiskey. We have sourced and curated an Irish whiskey where we've taken the inspiration from the past with a nod to honouring the tradition, but not bowing to it. If you believe, as we do, that Limerick should be known again for its whiskey, tell others what we're doing and help us to restore our lost whiskey heritage around the globe. As part of our Departed Spirits of Limerick series, we continue the campaigns of Galloping Hogan, our rebellious hero from the parish of Doon in County Limerick. After following the Irish Brigade to France, his service in the French army was cut short. After duelling with his cousin, he left for Portugal under the punishment of death. Known as Miguel Hogan, his renowned nighttime maneuvers, perfected in the defense of Limerick, were quickly put to good use. This could go one of two ways now. A hero of the Battle of Campo Maior against the Spanish in 1712, his hugely outnumbered force defended Portugal from Marquis de Bay, the scourge of the Portuguese. His victory was rewarded with lands, and later Miguel Hogan married into Portuguese aristocracy, raising a distinguished family with descendants still there to this day. In memory of Miguel Hogan and the blood he shed for Portugal, we have sourced a single malt whiskey which has been finished in a ruby port cask, a tribute to a rebellious spirit who found hope and peace in his adopted homeland with a Portuguese marriage. How about that? A storyteller and a whiskey maker, all in one. Boom. Eamon says a little water does open it up. Yes, I will come back to that with a little water. Thomond Gate, port cask, finished single malt, available only in the United States from Folsom Wine and Spirits. In fact, it's the only place you can find it in the world right now because it's sold out in Ireland. Bad news for our girl in the Oscars. Best Supporting Actress has not been won. All right, we struggle on. We'll struggle on. All right. Where was I? Oh, yes. So we've been very lucky here. Most of you, I think, are part of our Facebook group. If you're not already, go give it a join. Just Google or search on Facebook for Irish Whiskey Fans of America. Folks, we're about to hit 10,000 members in our community, which blows my mind. And so many of you are so active and contributory in that group, helping others expand their knowledge, find places to visit in Ireland, share your experiences, share your pictures, share your tasting notes, help where help is needed. A great, great community. Very proud of it. I can't take any credit for any part of it except throwing my old hat in the ring for a comment or two here and there. But the rest of you have really grown this community, and it's no wonder it's reached 10,000 members. I'm sure there's plenty of other Facebook communities out there bigger in size, but I don't think there's any Facebook groups that are bigger in size. I don't think there's a community as big as this anywhere, because a community is very different to a group, and a community helps one another. Is not there to shame somebody because they bought a cheap whiskey or because they have a palate or a nose that doesn't seem to match the notes you're getting. We don't do that in our group. We hero small brands and distilleries, and we showcase those who are doing interesting things, and we welcome people and we tell them to ask questions, and we'll be there to support them. That's a community. And I've seen great things come out of that community. We've raised a lot of money for charity in the community. We've met up individually, one-on-one with people. We've met as groups together. We've gone on buses together. It's a fantastic community, and we're about to hit 10,000 members. I posed a question in the group a couple of weeks ago. What should we do if we hit 10,000 members? And I said, only the craziest, most outlandish, ridiculous suggestions, please. In other words, things we probably couldn't do. Things like give everybody a bottle of whiskey, give away swag to everybody, buy our own castle, buy our own pub, you name it. So when we hit 10,000 members, we will, of course, do things like giveaways. I'll get some great swag, great bottles. I'll do some giveaways. That's a no-brainer. That's easy. But then somebody in the group, and it was Lisa Quarton, if I remember correctly, had the suggestion, why don't we try and break a world record? And I laughed, as it was as equally implausible as any of the other suggestions seem to be at some time or another until they become plausible. And I was thinking about it later, and I thought to myself, you know what? I grew up, my favorite book growing up was the Guinness Book of Records. Like, it was my favorite book. Every Christmas I would get a copy of it. I remember the 1987 book had a black cover. The 1988 copy had a white cover. Like, I remember, like, I would spend months going through and being fascinated by the world's tallest man, the most number of cups of tea drank in an hour, and most number of hot dogs eaten in 10 minutes. I love the Guinness Book of Records. And I thought to myself, could we break a record? The size of our group isn't going to be the thing that breaks the record, but is there something we could do as a group, as a community, that perhaps could help us break a record? And as I looked into it, I thought, okay, this is actually much harder than we thought. First of all, for us to even be permitted to use the logo or actually be granted a record, an approved record by the Guinness Book of Records or Guinness World Records, it costs upwards of $12,000 to get a record certified. That doesn't mean it makes it into the book. It might make it onto the website. It means you'll get certificates. It means you'll get the use of the logo. I thought, well, that's ridiculous. So I binned the idea. And then a few days later, I was wondering, to myself, well, what would the record be if we did try and break it, and what would be the attempt that we would make? And, you know, with alcohol, it's always tough. You don't want to, you can't be the most amount of pots of whiskey necked in 5 minutes, or the most number of single malts or shots of whiskey or picklebacks done in an hour. We don't want deaths on our hands, you know. We're trying to be kind of positive in the community. And I thought, I was wondering, well, I wonder what's over the last few years with COVID, people being locked down. We did things like the lock-in, where we got, some nights there was thousands of people tuned in. Nobody had anywhere to go. Everybody was at home. I think the first one we did, there was about 3,000 people at one point. 3,000 people watching. It was mad. Now everyone's gone off and doing their own thing, and they don't all sit at home waiting for a thing now anymore. But I thought to myself, what's the biggest toast? Like, is there an online toast people have done? And so I searched it, and I found it. I found the toast. There's a Guinness World Record for the most number of people to do an online toast at the same time. And it turns out it's like 340 people. And it's a Japanese company that did it. And won their annual general meetings. They got it approved by Guinness. And that's it. That's the record. 340 people online at the same time, certified. So in other words, Guinness is able to prove, yeah, they're all there. Everyone's got their glass. Everyone's saying slaunch or whatever it is. 340. That's the record. I thought to myself, well, we've 10,000 people in the group. Couldn't we surely break that record? But then how are we going to afford it? You know, it's $12,000, you know, that's, or at least starts at $12,000. That'll be an awful lot of sales of glassware, etc. And I was having this conversation in the Shelburne Bar in Cork, and Thomas Curran, one of the bartenders, he said to me, $12,000, and you need 400 people if you're to break the record. He said, Barry, that sounds like $30 a head to me. I said, Thomas, do you know what? I said, you're a smart man. Give me another whiskey now, and we'll talk about this. And so we did. And he said, well, why don't you just give everybody a chance to be part of the record, and everybody gets a Guinness World Record certificate saying they were part of the world record, and everybody throws $30 into the kitty, and we'll reach our 12,000 if we get 400 people, not just to pay, but to show up and break the record. Should we do it? Should we do it? The more people that do it, the cheaper it would be. But again, we could give the balance of the money. If there's more money raised, we could give it to charity or something. We could donate the money to a worthy cause. But 400 people, I mean, I think we could do it. I think we could get people on. So where it stands right now is, if we do want to do it, documentary short, just one, says D, an Irish goodbye. We'll take it. We'll take it. Excellent. Was there something else, that one that I missed? All these comments. Jason says it'd have to be in person. Well, no, it's virtual. It's a virtual toast. But I mean, it would need a human. So you'd have to be the human. So it would need people to be physically there, I would imagine. So what we do now is I've contacted Guinness World Records, and I now have somebody that I'm in contact with, and we're exchanging emails, and she's asked me to supply some information so they could come back to us and let us know what the parameters would be. In other words, what would be their criteria to certify it, to verify it? What would we have to do to prove it? It can't just be numbers of people tuned in, but I presume if it was a Zoom call, for example, they could get a list of all the attendees. They could see everyone on the screen. Anyway, I'm sure they've got methodologies for doing it. It's a record that exists. It has parameters. We just need to break it. If we were all part of it, we would all be Guinness World Record holders, and we could send you all out a certificate or a piece of paper that says, I, Stacey Stearns, was part of the world record beating biggest online toast as part of Irish Whiskey Fans of America, Stories and Sips, whatever it might be. Well, wouldn't that be fun? Like, I've not ever broken a record or been part of it. Tim Hurley from Lost Irish, I believe, is the recipient or owner of a number of world records. The Shelburne Bar in Cork has a world record for the most number of Irish coffees made in 5 minutes, I think. So anyway, that's the crack. That's the crack. I'll let you know once I have more information. We'll hit the 10,000 number in the next 2 weeks. And then after that, we'll start planning this event and seeing if we can break a record. If we can't end up getting it officially certified, we could always go for the world's largest online toast, even if we can't use the Guinness logo. But it'd be nice to have a Guinness World Record. I feel like that's the mark of we've achieved it. All right, if you've just joined us, you're welcome to the Shebeen. We're here crying over Irish losses at the Oscars and laughing and enjoying the crack of beating some world records and drinking some wine-finished whiskies, I'm going to go back to the Green Spot Quails Gate. Chris thinks we can get 400 people in a bar in Ireland. Chris, you've been to Ireland now. You've seen the size of our bars. We get 40 in a bar, not to mind 400. No, but this is an online toast. And imagine the biggest in-person thing is a lot bigger. You get tens of thousands of people at a football game, all part of a world record beating event, you know. This is a virtual toast, which I think is probably best for our group anyway. The sweetness really evolves and softens on the Quails Gate with time. The strawberries, raspberries, green apples, and a hint of red apples really on the nose come through really powerfully once we've given it a bit of time to open up. Weeg says you should start planning to have us march in 2024 in New York City Paddy's Day Parade. So here's an interesting thing. I was actually looking at the criteria for that today. I happen to be in New York this St. Patrick's Day. Like I'm going to be in New York. I'm going to be in New York on Tuesday for a couple of private events, and I fly home on the night of St. Patrick's night. So I'll be in New York during the day. And I was looking at the St. Patrick's Day Parade, the criteria, to see who can march in it. I've marched in it before. Like I've marched in it years ago as part of the men of the Bronx. I have a cousin who lived up in the Bronx, and I marched with him. Irish men of the Bronx. Anyway, you can't have any advertising. You can't have any green or white or gold. You have to dress in formal, like suits and business clothing. You're only allowed to have 3 flags. One of them is Irish. The second is American. And the third is a banner that says, England, get out of Ireland. I'm not joking. That's it. Those are the 3 you're allowed to have. You can't have any political advertising. You can't have any stories and sips or drink more Irish whiskey or Powers Irish whiskey or any of those things, which is mad. So anyway, there's weird criteria. You can't have anything green or what would be considered like odd clothing choices. You have to walk eight people abreast, 10 preferably. You need marshals to walk with you. It's wild. No floats. It's all very austere. Very austere. All right, what else have we got? Oh, yes. Yeah, so we will be celebrating St. Patrick's Day, though. While we won't celebrate it on the day, we might do something on the day from Manhattan. Maybe we'll do a toast or something, maybe, or put up a video of a toast from Manhattan. We're going to do an event this time next week. So next Sunday, I'll be joined by other people here. There'll be more than me here, at least 1, maybe 2 other people. And then we might have other people virtually, or we might just have the people here. In any case, we're going to have crack. We're going to have live music. There'll be a musician amongst us. Definitely not me. I'm not the musician. There'll be whiskey. There'll be a bit of crack. We'll open some special bottles. We'll talk about them. We'll tell stories of St. Patrick's Day all the way back when we were growing up. We'll talk about some Irish traditions. We'll talk about some funny things that we see around the world related to Ireland and that are celebrated. And we will celebrate those who celebrate Irish Month, Irish Week, St. Patrick's Day. So this time next Sunday, it'll still be early our time. Our clocks don't go forward for another 2 weeks. So it'll be 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight or Eastern Standard. Who knows? We're in this vortex of time at the moment where we will be confused and dazed and screaming at the clouds and sundials for the next 2 weeks until it all aligns again. But in any case, same time next week, we're going to do this, a Shebeen special, St. Patrick's Week special. We might as well extend out St. Patrick's Day for a few more days. Doesn't need to end on the 17th. We'll go on to the 19th. As simple as that. Sinead, what else have we got? For those of you who are not a member of our whiskey club, we'd love to have you. There's the link there, storiesandsips.com/club. There's not time to get into our Knappogue tasting kit, but there is time to join the event with Dave McCabe, blender Middleton Distillery. Also, if you want to get in on the Dunville's whiskey, you got to be a member of the club. It won't be available outside the club. It'll just be available to members of the club. Membership details are there at storiesandsips.com/club. And if you want to know whether the club is worth the investment of your time and your $20 a month, ask anybody on our Facebook community to give you advice or to share with you their thoughts, and they'll be honest with you. That's better than anything I can share with you. Let them be objective. Anybody in the comments can share with you if you're not yet a member, if it's worth it. If it's not, they'll tell you as well. All right. We've been going now for 2 hours. Whiskey bus / whiskey cruise news. Tony says, I see there's an Irish Oscar winner. So did I hear right that it's an Irish goodbye? Is that the winner? That's great. If it is, that's a great win. Does that mean I have to drink something good? Jason says, wait to join until after the Dunville's release. Steve wants to know if I'll be over the jet lag by the 19th. No, because I fly on the 15th, which means that I will remain in a permanent state of jet lag from the 15th all the way through to the 19th. So you won't even tell the difference. Yes, there is no karaoke in the whiskey bus. Let me tell you this. There's control of the microphone resting with me and Anthony Sheehy. If I'm sure there's plenty of people with louder voices that need a microphone that need a microphone. That's grand. And I'll allow market forces determine if the bus lets you keep singing or if the crowd descends upon you and tells you to stop singing. That's up to yourselves. But microphone control will not be yielded to any ladies or gentlemen to sing a song, I can assure you, lest we all lose our collective minds. Yes, Kristen, I'm talking to you. No karaoke machines, no plug-in pianos or keyboards. This isn't the traveling Wilburys now or the Von Trapps. So people might not be up for the singing of a sea shanty at 8 o'clock in the morning after a 12-hour session the day before. I'll have to catch up on the old Oscars there now after this. Okay, so if we have one Oscar win so far, we'll find something good to drink. All right, here's something good. We'll have something good. We'll drop something good. Talking about sherry cask finishes. Talking about sherry cask maturations. What about port cask? This is Redbreast 30-year-old all port cask. 30 years aging in a port cask. It was actually 24. I think it was 6 in a bourbon barrel. This is like the Method of Madness 28-year-old aged for an extra 2 years. This was released through the Whiskey Exchange in London. 444 bottles ever released. 30-year Redbreast. I opened this when Eric Ryan from Powers was here after we shut off the live stream and our Powers night we had. And me and Eric sat here for an hour drinking whiskey together and opening up bottles. I opened this for Eric because he'd never tried it. And what a great joy and privilege it was for me to sit beside a man who was a distiller in the Middleton Distillery and watch him enjoy it and share the notes he got from it. But the bottle's open anyway. We'll pour a drop in of it. This is, look at the lovely color in that. Look at that rich color. Ruby Port. Is it a Ruby Port or is it a, it doesn't say. Anyway, one of my top 5 whiskies of all time. So I hate to be drinking it here in front of you, but we said we'd open up something good. Oh, the nose on that. It's like juicy black currants that are 2 days past their freshness. They're almost on the cusp of just going bad, but they're the juiciest. You touch the outside of the skin of a black currant or a blackberry even, and it just falls apart into liquid. That's what we've got here. Oh, it's absolute joy. Joy, joy, joy. Mm. Staggering. Oh, leather, tobacco, plums, oak, dripping in vanilla sauce, vanilla cream sauce. But it's, oh, there's a lovely thick viscosity, dairy-like viscosity, but it yields into that rich, rich sweetness. Absolute thing of beauty. More Oscar winners, please. We'll crack open more. Kevin says, as I recall, you had quite a bit of the powers right in that Zoom call. Kevin, all in the interest of research. And they were only small pours compared to me big mouth. Daniel wants to know where we find these Stories and Sips Glencairns. We haven't had a Stories and Sips Glencairn yet, but we're working on it. We've had Stories and Sips 2 glasses here, which down to my last one. I'm working on Stories and Sips Glencairn Copitas, like this one. We'll have more of these. And I'm trying to get us some Stories and Sips Crystal Glencairns as well. So I'm working on those. Whiskey Bus and Whiskey Cruise. So we talked about no karaoke on the Whiskey Bus. Whiskey Cruise. So 2 weeks ago, I shared the idea or the wish that at some point in the future, we would do a whiskey cruise where we bring everyone to the Caribbean. And whether it's 500 of us or 1,000 of us, we take over a cruise ship or part of a cruise ship, and we bring the distilleries, the brands, and the whiskey to us. And we'll do it in 7 days going through the Caribbean, and we'd have an amazing time, and it would be the most crack ever. It seems like there was a lot of interest, and poor Anthony Sheehy, who's my partner on the whiskey tourism side of things, wasn't on the event on the live stream that night. Woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning to bring our friend from our whiskey club, Troy, home, who was staying overnight with him, bring him to the airport so he could fly back to America. 6 o'clock, he opened his phone and he said there were so many messages. He had to turn off his phone. They just kept buzzing and buzzing and buzzing. People friend requesting him, people messaging him saying, Barry said, we're doing a whiskey cruise. When's the ship? Where do I get my tickets? He said, Barry said, I almost called you at 6 a.m. I was so upset with you from all the messages I got from people. Anyway, I ran into Anthony in person down in Wexford last week, and he came for me. He said, listen, he said, you have to slow down. You have to slow down. He went for me neck. But we're going to do it. Of course we're going to do it. 2024, we're going to do it. We're going to do the whiskey cruise. It has to happen. Whiskey Bus. No more updates on that at the moment. We will share more as soon as we have them. Kevin says he'll be 100% be on the whiskey cruise. I'll 100% be on the whiskey cruise, let me tell you. The Whiskey Bus is coming up in August, and we're working on some more experiences that we hope to roll out in the coming months as well before the Whiskey Bus hits Ireland. So we'll share those with you. Tony with a good idea. It can coincide with the Dead Rabbit New Orleans opening. All right. Some of you have done 3-week cruises. Cruising is a big part of my past employment, and I've spent months and months and months at sea at a time. Spent 4 years working on cruise ships. So this would be a lovely coming together of Ireland, whiskey, and my past life all together on one whiskey week. We'd have to do it. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. So that's it, folks. That is our Shebeen. Unless there's any more questions or thoughts, I'm going to keep sipping on this 30-year whiskey and maybe go catch up on some of the Oscars. Tony says, I don't even care if we dock any place. My favorite cruises and passages have always been those with no ports. Transatlantics, gone through the Suez Canal. I spent 20 days at sea going from Athens through the Suez Canal down to India. Those are my favorite. Those are my favorite cruises as well. Like there is no ports, just at sea days, relaxing days. You don't want to be going ashore. No updates on anything in Ohio, Daniel. No, nothing yet. So Sinead, that's it, as they say in Irish. Keep an eye out. Hopefully in the next week, you'll get shipping notifications once the Knappogue Castle whiskies ship. Don't expect them anytime in the next 2 days, but they will be in the next week. You'll start getting shipping notifications, and everything should land with you with a few days to spare before the event in 2 weeks' time on the 27th. So that's it, everybody. Thanks a million for joining us on the Shebeen. Good old session tonight. I asked one last favor before I go, and that's click on the like button and the subscribe button. That's all you have to do if you're not a fan of the already. If you're not a fan, you don't want it, don't do it. But that's it. We will be back with you next Sunday for the St. Patrick's Week Shebeen with a musical guest. I'll announce that during the week. We'll have some fun with it. And I will toast you all on St. Patrick's Day from New York. And I hope whatever you get into on St. Patrick's Day, you stay safe, hydrated, full of ham sandwiches, and enjoy a good whiskey or 3 in good company. And that's all you can ask for on St. Patrick's Day. So hopefully you do it right and do it well. And I will see you all very soon and talk to you during the week. Happy St. Patrick's Day, and I'll see you on the 19th, all right? Slán, everybody.